What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you with part two of our Dynasty Rookie review. Today, we are talking about the wide receiver and the tight end position. I talked about quarterbacks and running backs yesterday. Basically, we're taking a holistic look at all of these rookies. How was their fantasy football season? And take a look at it in the scope of Dynasty Fantasy Football, of course. Also going to reveal where I had these guys graded pre-draft. Take some victory laps on some guys, take some L's on some guys as well. Another reminder that our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0 with new updates, bucketed rankings, buy, sell, hold advice, 2023 prospects, top 45 is coming soon. And as is our Devy Rankings Manifesto 1.0. And that is all available at patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. So if you feel like you want some more content, go check that out over there. But with that being said, let's hit the intro. All right, so as I did in yesterday's video, I'm going to go position by position. I'm going to reveal my pre-draft order where I had these guys graded, and then the grades of the players themselves, go in depth on their rookie seasons, what happened, where they ranked for me now, whether you should buy them, whether you should sell them, whether you should kind of hold them. And like I said, all of that buy, sell, hold advice for every position, not just rookies, is available in the Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0, which will be dropping today on our Patreon if you guys want to check that out. So these were my pre-draft wide receiver grades. You can see Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, and Jameson Williams rounded out my top five. Chris Olave, Skyy Moore, David Bell, George Pickens, and Justin Ross, who actually went undrafted, rounding out my top 10. This wide receiver class, we repeatedly talked about it as being the strength of the 2022 rookie class in general, and we were definitely right. 8 wide receivers make up the current top 12 of rookie rankings as it stands today to end the season per keep trade cut. And 8 wide receivers from this draft class make up the top 30 wide receivers per keep trade cut overall. So I'm going to go in order how I have them ranked now, not in order of how I had them ranked previously. Below is a chart or a heat map of their major metrics. So we can see guys like Drake London, we can see Garrett Wilson, we can see Chris Olave. These guys are objectively just absolute ballers and great options for you in Dynasty. We can see guys like Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams, Christian Watson also did some great things as well to take away from their rookie seasons. And a guy like George Pickens, for example, I'm going to get into, is objectively overvalued on the market right now. So we're going to start with who is my current wide receiver 1 from this rookie class, which is Garrett Wilson, wide receiver from the New York Jets. He is my wide receiver 8 in my overall Dynasty rankings, wide receiver 6 right now per keep trade cut. Highest graded receiver from this class, according to PFF. There was 5 games this year where Garrett Wilson had a quarterback that had a 90-plus quarterback rating. So in games where the Jets quarterback, whether that was Flacco, Zach Wilson, or Mike White, played very well, Garrett Wilson unsurprisingly averaged 18 PPR points per game, had 90-plus receiving yards in 4 of those 5 contests. Put simply, if Garrett Wilson went to a team with at least like a Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill level quarterback, he could have been a top 12 rookie wide receiver this year, could have been an elite fantasy wide receiver in general. Great profile, great rookie season, passes the eye test when you watch him. One of the easiest projections in the NFL as far as rookie wide receivers go in Dynasty. Hold him as a top 6 to 10 Dynasty wide receiver like he is. Another guy that is a top 6 to 10 wide receiver for me is Drake London. And Drake London, you got to dig a little bit deeper metric-wise because the flashy production wasn't quite there in some spurts. He led the class in target share. He led the class in targets per route run. He actually ranked top 4 in both of those categories among all wide receivers, not just rookie wide receivers. He had the second highest PFF receiving grade just behind Garrett Wilson this year as well. 2.4 yards per route run, which was tied with Christian Watson for 3rd in the class. Top 8 NFL draft pick. He was the first receiver selected in the NFL draft. Again, another wide receiver that if he goes to a team with a decent quarterback, he likely has, one of these top 12 seasons as a rookie. Not to mention the fact that the 2022 Falcons, along with this year's Chicago Bears, are the only 2 teams to throw sub 25 pass attempts per game since the 2005 Steelers. We're talking about, the Bears and the Falcons being 2 of the most run-heavy teams that we've seen in the last 15 years. So that just puts into context how good Drake London was on a per route, per target type of basis, because they did not come very, very often. And that changed once we saw Desmond Ridder take over. Hopefully they continue that trend going forward. That can't keep up in the modern NFL. They're not going to throw the ball 25 or less times per game, even if they're a run-heavy offense. Run-heavy offenses are typically around 30, 32 pass attempts per game. In my opinion, Drake London is easily easily the biggest buy in all of Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, especially at the wide receiver position. He's also the youngest wide receiver in the NFL right now, 21 and a half years old, and he just commanded the second highest targets per route run in the NFL among all wide receivers. That should really stick in your mind to give you a insight into how good Drake London actually is. Chris Olave, wide receiver 10 for me, wide receiver 9, according to Keep Trade Cut. Those first two guys, Drake London and Garrett Wilson, were actually my wide receiver 1 and my wide receiver 2 pre-NFL draft. Chris Olave was my wide receiver 6, but he was in a tier with Jahan Dotson. He was in a tier with Jameson Williams as like borderline wide receiver 4 territory. And the whole landscape of the wide receiver position was pretty, clustered in my opinion in the 2022 draft class. But post-draft, he was wide receiver 4 for me. Once I saw him go top 11 to the New Orleans Saints, an offense that, had a lot of targets available, I stopped overthinking him a little bit. The dude was sensational this year. Separation amongst the likes of the best receivers in the league. What knocked his pre-draft grade for me, which is why he was my wide receiver 6 and not like my wide receiver 3 or 4, is because his lack of yards after catch ability and functional strength in contested situations, which actually both came up for him in his rookie season. He actually ranked bottom 15 in the NFL in both of those categories. So those concerns kind of still stuck with him, but the high level separation, the ability to stretch the field deep, that really, really trumped those, concerns that we had with Chris Olave. Nearly 30% targets per route run is elite year one production, which is what Chris Olave posted second in the class in that metric. Hold him as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver, or buy him if you can, if people don't recognize him as being that valuable. So there's probably a tier break after those first three guys. All three of them are in my top 10 dynasty wide receivers. This next guy is actually my wide receiver 20. So there's a lot of, win now type of wide receivers, guys that are, closer to their prime in the middle of those, first three. And then these next, 4 or 5 wide receivers that I'm going to talk about. Treylon Burks is actually the guy that I have the highest. Wide receiver 20 right now, wide receiver 23, according to Keep Trade Cut. I might have some explaining to do here because I know a lot of you guys might say, how can you have Treylon Burks at wide receiver 4 ahead of Christian Watson or ahead of Jahan Dotson or ahead of George Pickens or ahead of Jameson Williams, whichever wide receiver you think is better than Treylon Burks? I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to comment that down below. That's fair. I'm sure, you could make an argument for it for sure. But to me, Drake London, Treylon Burks, and Garrett Wilson were the cream of the crop entering the NFL. They were my top, prospects. They were the guys that I had graded the highest as that first year top 3 wide receivers. Also, Treylon Burks, of those 3 top guys, was the most raw of the 3. And I think he showed quite a bit in his rookie season, considering that he was dealing with injuries, considering that he was dealing, with other things on and off. He wasn't necessarily a full-time player until, week 3 or 4, once he finally got back on the field. Then he got injured. So there was a lot of things that went wrong for Treylon Burks and a lot of excuses that you could make for him. But what we needed to see out of Treylon Burks, we definitely saw. We saw the flashes of the big play upside. We saw a lot of actual production too. He had a 100-yard game on Thursday night against Green Bay. By his second year, I think the fact that you see yellow scores across the board in target share and target rate, PFF receiving grade, yards per route run, I think by his second year, he can really take that, production step and become a lot more productive as a player. I think Burks is actually a fantastic buy low right now. Use the receivers that I'm about to talk about in the coming minutes if you can, or aging wide receivers if you're trying to pivot to a younger guy. To me, Treylon Burks is still one of the best receivers from this draft class, and I would still take him over Christian Watson. I would still take him over Jameson Williams, over George Pickens, over Jahan Dotson, and everybody else in this class that I have yet to mention. Speaking of Christian Watson, he is the next guy. He's ranked right behind Treylon Burks for me at wide receiver 21, wide receiver 19, according to Keep Trade Cut. Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams, and George Pickens kind of make up the rest of this tier, like I said. Although Watson didn't have the best profile in the world coming out of North Dakota State, he did have very good market share related statistics in his final season because they didn't throw the ball very much. But when they did, Christian Watson was heavily involved. He had borderline first-round draft capital coming into the NFL. He was like the 34th overall pick in the draft. Athleticism out the wazoo, had a great pre-draft process at the Senior Bowl and all that kind of stuff as well. And he improved every year of his collegiate career, which were pretty much all green flags for me. And it's why I started to get a little bit higher on Christian Watson once we got post-draft and I started to really dig into his profile holistically. Christian Watson proved the same explosive playmaker that we saw at North Dakota State in the NFL, posting 5 top 15 wide receiver weeks in his rookie season, despite dealing with injury, not being on the field the whole time, and a couple weeks in which he was like the top 3 of the wide receiver position. That's likely going to continue going forward. Not sure if we're going to get Aaron Rodgers back at quarterback, and that's definitely something to be concerned about with Christian Watson, but I still love what he showed on his own merits. Again, as a raw rookie that needed development, we saw a lot of encouraging signs out of Christian Watson. My comparison for him coming out of North Dakota State. And again, I was lower on him. He was my wide receiver 11, was Chase Claypool. And in his rookie season, he kind of mirrored exactly what Chase Claypool did in his rookie season, where both guys were touchdown scorers. They were big play threats. I think that Christian Watson, as of right now, is a firm hold. I would say that I'm probably buying him if Aaron Rodgers retires and he starts to slip in value, but I'm probably selling him if Aaron Rodgers comes back because he's probably going to go up in value. So a guy that I'm kind of just on par with market. Again, I'll take my L here. I did, grade him too low pre-draft, but I did start to warm up to him as the draft process went along and as we got to post-draft when I saw where he was going. And once I did that video titled Wide Receivers to Target and Avoid, and I realized how good his market share statistics actually were and the fact that he improved every year of his collegiate career. So moving on to the next guy, we have Jahan Dotson, who's my wide receiver 25 right now, wide receiver 28 according to Keep Trade Cut. Dotson was my dude coming out. You guys, if you were following the channel, you know I love Jahan Dotson coming out of Penn State. People slandered his profile, but the bottom line was the dude could play, right? We saw that in the NFL so far. 7 touchdowns in 12 games definitely solidifies that take. And if you remove the games that he played actually less than a 70% snap share, because he was dealing with hamstring injuries on and off, he averaged 14.04 PPR points per game on a Met offense, competing for targets with Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. Very impressive. And I'm very much hoping to see 2 of my guys connect going forward, because you guys know from yesterday's video that I was very high on Sam Howell. It sounds like he's going to get a crack at the starting job there in Washington, and I would love to see these 2 guys connect for years to come. The market share stats are a little concerning with Jahan Dotson, though. I will say he didn't have the greatest target share in the world. He didn't have the greatest targets per route run in the world. Only 1.5 yards per route run. Also not the highest, level production. But for a rookie wide receiver to score 7 touchdowns in 12 games, be 14.0 fantasy points per game when he was healthy and on the field, that is all I really need to see out of Jahan Dotson. To me, he's like a soft buy right now, not a guy that I'm going all in on necessarily. I think he's appropriately priced, give or take. So Jameson Williams, a guy that I do not think is appropriately priced, who's wide receiver 17 per Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 26 in my own rankings. Jameson Williams is really going to test all of our processes because there's very little to take away from his rookie season. And that's really tough when you have an entire draft class of a ton of takeaways for Olaves and for Garrett Wilsons and Drake London types. Because aside from the big plays and aside from the high target rate that we saw from Jameson Williams when he was actually out there running routes, we didn't really see him do a whole lot. At the same time, though, it seems like the market at wide receiver 17, according to Keep Trade Cut, is recognizing that his rookie season is very much a wash because, first year removed from the ACL tear, we know wide receivers tend to struggle. And because Jameson Williams was so highly thought of in the dynasty community coming into the season, it seems like it's full steam ahead. Year 2 breakout, Jameson Williams, second year off the ACL tear, everybody's going to be all in. And while I'm of a similar belief, I definitely think that's fine, rationale. And if you believe that, by all means, go nuts. I do think it's worth mentioning, though, that it's not a guarantee, right? I think everybody's kind of locking it in as a guarantee he's going to be this great wide receiver. I think we just have so much more data on the rest of the wide receivers in this class because they played full rookie seasons than I do for a guy like Jameson Williams. So to me, I'd be seeing what I can fetch in a trade, because if you can sell Jameson Williams for Treylon Burks in a second round pick, to me, you have to do that. Profit the free second round pick, get a guy in a similar tier, a guy that, if Treylon Burks hits in his second season, can rise just as much as Jameson Williams can, because they were both highly thought of coming into the dynasty season. A guy like Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens as well. If you can profit a free second rounder, I think you have to do it, in my opinion. So Jameson Williams, a guy that I definitely like going forward, but I do think the market's going a little crazy on him, just given that we do have some question marks about his profile. Another guy that I have a lot of question marks about his profile, and I'm definitely going to have to defend myself here, is George Pickens, who's wide receiver 30 for me in my rankings. He's wide receiver 20, according to Keep Trade Cut. So for me, in our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0, I have him listed as a hard sell because I do think he's overvalued. George Pickens stands are going to rip me apart in the comments right now. They're going to call me an idiot, say I don't know what I'm talking about. But I beg you to listen to my rationale first before you do that. If you're a George Pickens guy, if you're a Steelers fan or whatever, listen to what I have to say first. Do I think George Pickens is a great football player, a good football player with an uncanny ability to come down with anything and everything when it comes to difficult catches, contested catches? Absolutely. He's very good in that area of the game. But do I think the skill set that he has is very optimal for a highly productive fantasy football wide receiver? No, I absolutely do not. Courtland Sutton, I think, is a good career projection for a guy like George Pickens, because even though, again, I would say the same thing about Courtland Sutton, he's a great wide receiver. He's a good wide receiver. He can come down with great contested catches and all that kind of stuff. Courtland Sutton has never finished as a top 24 wide receiver in points per game. His highest finish came back in 2019, wide receiver 27 in points per game. A solid season, but nothing spectacular, nothing that was going to have you, taking him as a top 12 dynasty wide receiver the next year or anything like that. He and Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, have a pretty good connection so far. So it's possible that we get a couple really solid seasons out of George Pickens, and maybe Kenny Pickett's a great quarterback, and that helps the efficiency of a guy like him. However, I just don't think this is a guy that can ascend very much more in value. I think a top 20 guy is about the ceiling range of outcomes for him, which to me signals that people think he has wide receiver one upside. The fact that they're ranking him as a top 20 wide receiver right now, 16.3% targets per route run. His underlying metrics aren't good. That's basically the point of this entire thing. This kind of aligns perfectly with what we thought of George Pickens coming out of Georgia, or at least what I thought of him, was that he was going to be, a great big play threat, a guy that's really good in contested situations, but he's not going to be consistent on a down-to-down basis, earning targets, getting open. Per next-gen stats, he had the 7th lowest average separation per target, and his PFF receiving grade was sub 70, which was actually 10th in the draft class. So I know everybody thinks that George Pickens might be the best receiver from this draft class, but I'm telling you right now, don't be fooled by the flashes. Don't be fooled by the great contested catches that he made, because while that's his skill set, he doesn't do that every play. He's not consistent on a down-to-down basis, and his absolute nuts range of outcomes that some people might be thinking of, like maybe a Mike Evans or a DK Metcalf, both of those guys have developed as route runners. Both of those guys who are freakier athletes than George Pickens, and both of those guys have been more consistent down to down than George Pickens has ever been so far in his short career. So in my opinion, I think you need to sell him right now, sell him, and get Jahan Dotson in a second, sell him and get Christian Watson or Treylon Burks or Jameson Williams, whoever you want to go after, or sell him for just, maybe a 2024 first round pick or something like that and re-roll him into a rookie. So I like George Pickens, but I'm not going crazy with how I'm projecting him. I think he's going to end up being, boomer bust wide receiver 2-3 type the rest of his career, which is a fine option to have as a young receiver in Dynasty, but I don't think we're ever getting, top 20 type of season out of him, a top 12 type of season out of him, like some people might be projecting. So moving on to the next tier of wide receivers, because I would say all these guys that I talked about so far generally thought of as pretty valuable in Dynasty. These next couple guys I'm going to breeze through a little bit faster, but I do want to talk in depth about the next guy, which is Skyy Moore, wide receiver 44 right now for me in my rankings, wide receiver 53 according to Keep Trade Cut. I was really excited for Skyy Moore, man. I had him rated higher than George Pickens coming out. I had him rated higher than Christian Watson coming out. I thought he was going to be great. Based on what I saw from him at Western Michigan, what I saw from him on tape, his rookie season feels incomplete to me, though. And to some degree it is, because they still have to play some playoff games left. But the only saving grace that we can point to with Skyy Moore, if you're a Skyy Moore stan or you liked him coming out, is that targets are earned, routes are given, right? Because Skyy Moore only ran 149 routes this year, which is not a high number. It was actually 7th on the team, less than Travis Kelce, less than Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Even guys like Justin Watson and Noah Gray ran more routes, and it was 7th on the team, like I said. It's not encouraging that he couldn't get on the field, but the important takeaway for Skyy Moore is that when he was on the field, he commanded 22.1% targets per route run. He had a 70.0 PFF receiving grade. I still have some belief to the point that I'd be buying, given that Juju and Hardman are free agents, and they said that when they drafted Skyy Moore, it was more of like a 2023 type of move. But the issue is that Skyy Moore is now considered a face planter, and that is not my term. It's a term invented by DF Bean Counter on Twitter. Drew found that wide receivers that lost 12 or more spots of Dynasty Rookie ADP at their position, ergo, the Dynasty community recognized that they disappointed as rookies and therefore started undervaluing them. Those guys hit a top 24 season just 10% of the time. So basically, translation meaning if we give up as a Dynasty community on a player, usually that means that we should always give up on those players because the hit rates are very low. It's usually not a good idea to buy low on players that the Dynasty community as a consensus starts to give up on. So I would say unless you can get Skyy Moore for an early 3rd round pick or maybe a late 2nd at absolute most, you're better off re-rolling those picks into future rookies because, these fresh rookies that don't have any blemishes on their profile, we have a very, very high indicator that Skyy Moore might not work out in the NFL in the fact that he's a face planter who lost, wide receiver 30 or so ADP when he was drafted to now like wide receiver 55. Like I said, the Dynasty community has started to give up on this guy, and that's not a good sign. So definitely not encouraging for Skyy Moore. The next couple guys, I'm just going to breeze through. Wan'Dale Robinson, as you guys can see on the screen there, wide receiver 55, wide receiver 44 per Keep Trade Cut. Wan'Dale Robinson was great when he was healthy. And to be honest, he'd probably be a lot closer to a guy like George Pickens than he would be Skyy Moore if he didn't go down. And who knows, with the way the Giants have been playing recently, he might even be better than a guy like George Pickens on the market right now. 27.7% targets per route run is absolutely an awesome number. It was 3rd only to Drake London and Chris Olave in this class, but he's probably not somebody that I'd be buying into right now. As we know with wide receivers, and Michael Gallup is a perfect example of this right now, you're usually not back to 100% post ACL tear until about like 15, 16 months later. So I would imagine that Wan'Dale Robinson starts out slow next year, if at all. If he's not even on the field, that's even better. I would say that if you want to buy Wan'Dale Robinson, the best time to do it is when he gets back on the field and doesn't look like himself, because that way people will just be like, oh, maybe he just isn't that good. I'm going to, sell him for like anything I can get, maybe a mid third round, a late third round pick. And I think that's the time that you pounce. So I would wait a little bit on Wan'Dale Robinson, wait till he's back on the field, maybe wait till he doesn't look the same, and then buy him. So the next couple guys, I'm really just going to breeze through. Romeo Doubs, he was fine this year, 23.8% targets per route run, but he wasn't overly efficient. He wasn't overly consistent. If somebody offered me an early third or better for him, I would probably take it. Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts, again, kind of middling production. Not somebody I'm super excited about. He fell short of pretty much every major analytics mark. I'd use his youth, his draft capital, and the fact that he wasn't a complete disaster to sell him for like a late second or a package in a deal if you could. John Metchie obviously did not play at all due to leukemia and also coming off of an ACL tear as well. Hopefully he comes back 100% in 2023. The GM of the Houston Texans actually said he might even be ready for OTAs, which would be really awesome for him. Probably a good bet for comeback player of the year, along with DeMar Hamlin if he's able to come back as well. Not a bad buy if you want to sell like a mid to late third round pick to get John Metchie, but I probably wouldn't give up much more than that. And then David Bell, which is going to be the final wide receiver that I'm going to talk about. Obviously a guy that probably was my biggest miss of the entire, process, because David Bell, I was drafting early in the second round of most of my rookie drafts, and his rookie season was objectively awful. He was terrible this year. PFF grade in the 50s, target share, target rate, 12.6% or worse. Those are awful numbers, among the league low in yards per route run as well. The only saving grace that we have for David Bell is the fact that, again, I liked him as a prospect, which isn't really as relevant now that we have a full season for him as a rookie, and the fact that he's a fourth youngest wide receiver in the NFL right now. So he's a very young player. It's possible it takes him more time to develop. He's kind of like the Isaiah Spiller of wide receivers for me, but I would not buy David Bell unless you're getting him for absolute pennies, late thirds, early fourth round picks, maybe 20th plus round in a startup. I'm probably going to chalk this one up as a miss. Could turn it around, but like I said, face planner's not likely to do that, and he definitely face planted this year, so not a good look for David Bell. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on tight ends, but I will highlight a couple things. Greg Dulcich, who is my tight end 11 right now, tight end 11 per keep trade cut, top 18 finish in points per game this year on the lowest scoring offense in the NFL as well. So definitely impressive. Unseeded Albert Okwuegbunam in his rookie season and commanded a top 13 target share at the position. So Greg Dulcich of the tight end group this year, I think is the most promising going forward. And he's definitely the guy that I'm bought into most from this rookie tight end class. The market, though, is about on par in terms of value with him, so you're not going to get a discount on Greg Dulcich. Pretty much everybody recognizes that his rookie season was good. Trey McBride, who is my tight end 2 from this class as of now, he was my tight end 1 entering the NFL draft. Tight end 16 right now, tight end 17 per keep trade cut. He heated up at the end of the season once Zach Ertz went down, but to be honest, I think he should have done a little bit more once Zach Ertz went down because he wasn't really productive until like the final 2 games of the season. Regardless, though, he was my tight end 1 entering the NFL draft. Should be well set up. Perfect tight end 2, 3 type for your roster if you need some upside behind like a George Kittle or like an older tight end like that. Tight end 3 for me right now is Jelani Woods. Tight end 17 overall for me. Tight end 21 per keep trade cut. I think the same can be said for him, who was very good when he got his chances. Top 18 at the position with a 20.8% target rate. The few games that he actually got to be the starting tight end for Indianapolis, he actually had some great finishes, including that Monday night game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had a great game. He was like the tight end 2 on the week that week. He's a freak athlete. He's a top 75 draft capital player. He showed flashes. I'm loading up late in startups on a guy like Jelani Woods. Same goes for Chig Okonkwo. The metrics love him, right? Obviously, 33.3% target rate was second at the position, but he was a 4th-round draft pick. He did struggle to find the field consistently. Could be like a Jonnu Smith type of breakout candidate in Tennessee heading into next year, but I'm not sold that this guy's suddenly a great fantasy football tight end. So his value at tight end 14 per keep trade cut, I might be selling him if I can get a 3rd-round pick, an early 3rd-round pick or something like that. And then finally, the final 2 guys I'll talk about here, Cade Otton for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, tight end 22, tight end 20 per keep trade cut. He flashed some big-time games here and there when he was the starter and Cameron Brate was out of the lineup, but he couldn't fully unseat Cameron Brate. But 9.1 PPR points per game in games where he played more than 80% of the snaps is definitely impressive. So I would say Cade Otton, probably worth taking a shot on as your like tight end 3, tight end 4 in startup drafts right now. And then finally closing it out is Daniel Bellinger, tight end 23. He started strong, but he tailed off. So I'm not, overly impressed with Daniel Bellinger, but he did show some flashes here and there. So that is the wide receiver, the tight end, the running back, the quarterback rookie review. If you guys want to check out yesterday's video, if you haven't already seen it, go ahead and check it out. Like I said, if you want access to all of our rankings, 2023 prospects, bucketed rankings by age, positional rankings, top 200s for your startups, all that is included. Buy, sell, hold advice, rookie pick value if you want to know what you should sell certain players for. That is available in our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0, all new, fully refurbished, coming to you guys later today. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already done so. Patreon.com/fantasy stock exchanges where you can get access to it, along with, first dibs on Dynasty decisions and a special announcement coming later on in the process. We'll also be launching something that is really, really cool that we're going to be really, really excited for as well. So stay tuned for that. All available on Patreon. Make sure to check that out. Also, the gauntlet returns, the mitten returns coming up this week. So for those of you guys that didn't get involved in the playoff best ball grind before the playoffs started, after the first round, they reboot these contests and you can get access to, playoff best ball over there on Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you use that promo code FSE. When you sign up at first deposit, you get 100% back on whatever you put in. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Why you need